Welcome to Kitchen Conversations. We have Lauran Thomas with us again today, mental health therapist, and we are so thankful to have you here because, of course, we know that Mental Health Awareness Day was this month in October, and when we asked for questions this month, we have questions on depression, and we know that, too, going into the holidays, a lot of times the suicide rates go up and stuff like that, so we thought we could talk about those topics today. Just so that you could help us figure out how to either support someone who's going through it or support ourselves if we're going through it. So welcome. So glad you're here.
Glad to be back.
So one of these questions basically said, I've struggled for years with anxiety and depression, especially postpartum depression. And they've been on various medications and experienced side effects. So they finally got off all their medications. But so far, nothing has changed. And the question is, at what point do I give up and stop trying to solve the issue and accept it? And how do I keep from falling back into depression? They're very discouraged and down right now. So I think we were talking earlier, and you could tell us maybe a little bit more about depression versus, some of the other terms you were using, and just clue us in.
Yeah, wow. My heart just goes out to that person who's hurting because, sometimes I think that space of just, it's hopeless and it's not going to ever get better. I think we can all find ourselves there. And especially when it sounds like this person has really tried lots of different avenues. One of the things about depression, and in that question, I'm definitely leaning to this person has been diagnosed with depression and that it's a clinical issue. This is not, just a situational issue that we're looking at. And so, I think that one of the things is we kind of have to look at depression as like any physical or mental illness that we're looking at, and it's like multifaceted. And so we have to look at all the avenues and address how we're dealing with each one. Because sometimes I think we can get really locked in on one symptom and just really hone in and try to get help in that one symptom, but really looking at it's the total person that we're having to look at. It's the mind, it's the body, it's the spiritual connection, it's the relationships that you're in, it's how you're taking care of the physical body, your sleep, your exercise, your nutrition. How are you expressing yourself creatively? Like, what are you doing that's good for yourself? How is your marriage if you're married? How is your marriage intimacy? How is your connection there going for you? How is your connection with Christ? And, when I kind of open up that door and start looking at it, and when I'm working with someone with depression, when we open up all those different doors, it actually starts to, I think, help with the hopelessness because we're not stuck in one spot. I think in this question, if I heard something about medication, they had taken medication and they had stopped because it didn't seem to work. Well, that's one door. And you're right. Sometimes medication doesn't work. And so then we can open up another door and say, okay, so if medication isn't the answer, then have we looked at your nutrition? Have we looked at your sleep cycles? Have we looked at your daily exercise? Now, with depression, all of these things that we're discussing are actually going to be difficult because when you're depressed, you feel less like doing the things that produce positive emotional responses. And so you're really fighting against a feeling. And I think sometimes when we can tell ourselves that it is a feeling, that means that we have to push past the feeling and make that action happen, even when we don't want to do that, because we know that it will be better for us. So as a therapist, I say, no, don't give up. As a Christ follower, I say, no, don't give up. God's got a great plan for you. And sometimes that plan, as hard as it is, and I'll tell you, walking with people in their hurt, it doesn't make sense in the midst of the plan, because that hurt is so deep. And it is so miserable, but giving up is not. It's not an option because there are so many things to investigate.
I love that. It's interesting as I came across the scripture just before we met today, and it was from Isaiah 61, and it was good news for the oppressed. And it says, The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to comfort the brokenhearted and to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. He has sent me to tell those who mourn that the time of the Lord's favor has come, and with it, the day of God's anger against their enemies. To all who mourn in Israel, he will give a crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessing instead of mourning, festive praise instead of despair, which when you're in despair is just so hard to even picture. But he goes on to say, in their righteousness, they will be like great oaks that the Lord has planted for his own glory. And I always feel like that God's telling this story. He's going to use that thing that is just such a trial in our lives to show his glory in that. It says, they will rebuild the ancient ruins, repairing cities destroyed long ago. They will revive them, though they have been deserted for many generations. Foreigners will be your servants. They will feed your flocks and plow your fields and tend your vineyards. You will be called priests of the Lord, ministers of our God. You will feed on the treasures of the nations and boast in their riches. Instead, I like this verse right here too. Instead of shame and dishonor, you will enjoy a double share of honor. You will possess a double portion of prosperity in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. I was like, he didn't just say joy will be yours. He
Everlasting.
said everlasting joy will be yours. And I just thought, he just wants to remind us, that these are feelings, right? And so they seem so intense, and just that hope that he has, that he wants to say, I see you, I love you, you are not alone, I hear you. And so I'm thankful you're joining us to help us with that. So tell us more.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking of is that there is some conflict, I think, and especially for Christians, there's some conflict in I should be able to lean into his word so much that I overcome this. And I don't think that's all, because there's so many other things that we know, right? God gave the ability for science to be studied, and for the human behaviors to be studied, and for doctors to develop these amazing medications once they've studied the brain to be able to support, right? And so I think that sometimes is a tug of war for Christians, is that I'm not doing enough, right? I'm not praying enough. I'm not fellowshipping with Christians enough. I'm not going to church enough, right? It's all these not enough things. And so I'm part of the space of depression is recognizing you're doing enough today in God in regards to the relationship, right? You're asking him for help, and now let him guide you, right? Look at the resources he's provided to us. They're plentiful. And so one of the things I thought might be really neat is, because depression was one of the keys. So I was thinking on this going, wait, medication is one thing. And so realizing that if you have clinical depression, if you've been diagnosed, and depression is a medical diagnosis. If you've been diagnosed, then medication can be helpful, but it's not an answer. It's a part of the puzzle. And so therapy, it's a part of the puzzle. There's not any therapist in the world who's going to fix you or who's going to take all the feelings that you don't like away. But it's just a part of the puzzle. But there are a lot of other parts of the puzzle that you can do independent of medical treatment. And so I thought it might be kind of helpful for us to kind of talk about what are some of those parts of the puzzles that say, hey, I can wake up in the morning and I have control over this, and I can make a choice to lean into something that possibly could make me feel better, even if I don't have the innate motivation to do it. Mm-hmm. And so some of that is, one of the things is getting into a routine. Now I'm going to counter that with something. Sometimes people who are super type A and are very rigid in their routines find that not helpful when they're struggling with depression. And so they actually need to mix up their routine. So you kind of have to know who you are there. But it's either, if you have no routine and you're just waking up every day and letting the day happen to you, it's taking some charge and some action to say, what would be something that is good for me today? I'm going to put it in my routine, and I'm going to do it every day when I don't even when I don't have the motivation to do it, because the possibility is that I can feel better.
And maybe set your phone with the alarm so that you remember to do it.
Right. Exactly. Sometimes it's actually not allowing yourself to and I'll use YouTube or Facebook or a pleasurable food or drinking a cup of coffee or something that is pleasurable, but that is not a necessity.
Mm.
Not allowing yourself, like giving yourself that as a reward to doing this thing that you're not super motivated to do. That's just another way. It's like kind of challenging your brain a little bit in that, setting realistic goals. I would imagine that the majority of the people listening are probably Northern Virginia because that's where you're sitting. We have a tendency in Northern Virginia to set monstrous goals and to put more on our plate than we really need to. So daily goals doesn't mean excessive goals. It means small, attainable, measurable goals. And so it has to be small, right? So when we're feeling super down and unmotivated and kind of like life is happening to us, then our goal would look something that was for you attainable. Okay, a goal for me would be going out for a walk, but that's because I typically run. So when I'm down or when I'm low, then a walk would be an attainable goal because I'm not having to put out so much energy. Well, a walk might seem overwhelming for someone who doesn't do any exercise. So maybe it's actually just sitting outside, right? So you have to figure out where you are to make your goal attainable for you. Eating healthy. One of the things that gets in our way of doing well is our own self. And we have comfort foods, all of us. I mean, I would imagine you do, Michelle. I know I do. And so we have to say, okay, what is that doing to our long term? Sometimes our comfort foods are perfect in the moment, but the long term impact. And one of the things for depression is we're trying to impact serotonin, okay? Because serotonin is a chemical in the brain, and we want to increase our serotonin. And so caffeine actually decreases serotonin.
Ooh, wow, that's good to know.
Right. So, I mean, I love my
coffee.
I know. I mean, I love my coffee. Some people love their soda. Some people need that caffeinated tea. Okay, fine. But if you're finding yourself feeling super bummed and low and just apathetic, you might want to pay attention to how much caffeine you're putting in, because that's impacting a chemical that's been studied in the brain, right? This isn't a feeling. This is a fact.
Yeah.
And then in that serotonin, the other thing is we can do things to increase serotonin. So certain foods are serotonin enriched. So omega-3s, folic acid, those things, if we can get those in our diet, healthy fats like coconut oil, if we can try to say, okay, I'm going to look at the things that can be rich in my body that can help with things when maybe I'm just not doing so well. Okay, it doesn't mean I like salmon at all. Really, I can't stand it. But I do know that fatty fishes have good omega-3s. Okay, if I wasn't doing well, I probably would figure out a way to get some of those good things in me because it's something I can control.
Right.
Taking responsibility, I know that sounds kind of interesting, but it's saying, what can I do? So it's saying I have some ownership here. Mm-hmm. It's not that I am responsible for feeling crappy, but I am responsible for what I can do to help myself not feel as crappy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Well, I think if you're feeling that way too, you want, what can I do, right? Like, so yeah, I love these ideas. I need to go back and start writing them down.
The other thing when we're, especially women, now men have this as well, but I'll speak specifically to women. But if we have prolonged periods, and let's say we have not been diagnosed with depression, but we're having prolonged, that means more than a few weeks is prolonged. Experiences where we're not wanting to do the activities that we once enjoyed, or when we do these activities, we're not finding them pleasurable anymore. We're finding it really difficult to do our daily living skills. Daily living skills are things like showering, brushing our teeth, putting on makeup if that is a typical thing we do, going to work, hanging out with our kids, right? If we're finding those typical daily living skills to just be not happening, or finding them really difficult for prolonged periods of time, one of the things we really need to do is we first need to go to the doctor, because what could be happening is we could have some type of an imbalance. So hormone imbalance, thyroid imbalance, adrenal gland imbalance, our sexual hormone imbalances can cause mood shifts. So it's like knowing yourself, like paying attention and going, oh, this has actually been going on longer than a week. We're kind of at the 2-week part is when we start really looking. Like when a doctor is going to ask a question, they're going to say, so in the last 2 weeks, have you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they start assessing. Is this situational? I'm just down in the dumps. I had a job change. My best friend moved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this something that is going on longer and your life is now being overly impacted by it? So we want to get blood work done immediately, because through the blood work, and we have to ask specifically. One of the big specifics, I always send clients to get blood work, because I'm not a doctor. So I can't tell if your hormone levels are imbalanced. And one of the things that they typically don't test for is they don't test for vitamin D levels. And as we come into these winter months, when the time changes, this is when people begin to actually experience more depression because there's less sunlight. And sometimes that's just a vitamin D deficiency. That's kind of easy to fix.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, myself in the winter, I'm like, I have to get outside for 20 minutes, even if it's cold, because otherwise, gray day after gray day. Whew.
Right, and that's why they've come out with these infrared lights that you can sit in front of. So that's another natural way to impact. Do you have one?
I own two. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I felt like they helped as much, but I mean, I could be taking vitamin D. Who knows, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, it's and I think it's because every tool, every idea is trial and error, and that's why I think sometimes also there is a complexity with medication, because medication is trial and error too, because it's a if you have a clinical depression, it's a chemical imbalance. Well, but there's nothing to go in and test which specific chemical imbalance and how much. Mm-hmm. And so the psychiatrist or the doctor has to really, they're saying, hey, this is an art, and I have to be creative with your body. And so sometimes it says, I try this one, I might have to increase it or decrease it. And then sometimes the side effects are so terrible that you say, change it.
Yeah. I think that probably even helps for this person who asked the question to know that it's an art, right? So if something's not working, they need an opportunity to look at what could work.
Right. And I think sometimes this is where also faith and prayer comes in, mm-hmm. because sometimes we put our faith in the doctor, mm-hmm. and yes, we want their expertise, but we also want to be self-advocating for ourselves. And if we're discerning that something's not going right because we're praying about it and we're engaging, and then there's just this sticky feeling like, this is not well for me, this is not working, advocate for yourself. Mm-hmm. Anytime a client comes to me and starts talking about all the side effects they could be experiencing, I'm like, call the doctor. Here's typical side effects, so you need to know what those could be. But if it's not sitting well with you, it's not the only option. Mm-hmm. So there are natural supplements some people love. I mean, if you've ever been in my office when I was actually in an office and not on a computer, I diffuse essential oils. It's not medical, but if it smells good it engages one of our positive senses. That increases mood. I mean, it's just little things, right? There's things you can do. My daughter does not have anxiety, but some reason she was being a little nervous about a test. I put some calming oil on a necklace and she wore it to school. Whether it was placebo or not, she came home not stressed about her test. Right? I mean, we can do these things for ourselves as well. Like, sometimes it is. It's like, oh, wow, I really like the smell of X. I'm going to just keep that around. Sometimes people talk about putting lotion in their purse, like a good smelling lotion, something that reminds them of positive energy. And so they're in a meeting where they're kind of getting criticized or kind of berated or beat down, or they're at a school function and they're kind of feeling a little left out, right? You could just grab something and smell it, right? It's not going to fix your feeling, but it shifts your brain.
Ooh,
and just in that, you're doing something.
Yeah, I have this Kai lotion that smells like Hawaii to me, right? And every time it does, I don't even think about that as a good option to try, but it brings that good feeling, right?
And sometimes people will have things that remind them of a pleasurable place. Like, I know, especially when we're talking about like depression associated with grief. There's lots of different conversations. That's a whole nother topic. But the idea is sometimes when we are missing something, and remember, grief isn't just someone has passed away. Grief is also just a loss of something that's important to you, and something that's valuable to you. So grief can even be like missing a friend, not having them present anymore, and just something simple. Like, I have a friend of mine gave me a little sign, and before I moved, and it was, something very small, I'm sure, for her to do, but the words on the little sign are something I look at every day, and there is warmth that I feel because it's a connection space. Actually, this friend lives in Hawaii. I live in Colorado. We're not going to see each other very often. but that right there is just that space to say that's warmth that brings something close to me. When I see that, I think of something good, and it produces more positive space in my brain.
So for people that have like family members that are struggling with depression or stuff like that too, so we know a little bit about things we can be doing, but what can they be doing for family members that are struggling?
Well, one of the things I think is realizing that you're not responsible for their emotional space and their emotional wellness. And that's one of the, I think it's easy for me to say that. It's hard to do that. But that's the first thing, is realizing I can support without owning, and really recognizing what am I looking for in someone. How can I recognize, oh, they're not just not doing well, but they're actually really, really hurting. And that's intimidating, probably. I don't want to say something wrong, or I don't want to do something that offends them. And so sometimes we don't do anything because of our own fear. When you speak to people who are hurting, one of the best things that I hear over and over and over is that someone reached out. Someone didn't talk to me about my depression. They talked to me about life. That they didn't make me feel different. That they just sat with me. Loneliness, when people are depressed, there's a tendency to isolate. If your family member is isolating excessively, right? This is not your teenager who needs a break from you. Okay. Give them permission to have a break. But if this is even, a spouse who is, they come home from work, and typically you would engage in conversation, and maybe you would, just sit down and catch up on the day, but they come in and they immediately just kind of like veg out, and that is prolonged. right? Go and engage, right? Don't be afraid to say, seems like something's going on. If you don't want to talk about it, that's cool, but hey, I'm here for you. Distracting, you know, whatever that norm routine that someone who is kind of hurting gets into, as a loved one, as a friend, you can just distract. I remember someone, I have great stories, which I love because people share with me their hurts, right? And so we talk about like what's helpful. It's like, oh, that friend didn't ask me if I wanted a cup of coffee from Starbucks on the way home from dropping off kids. They just brought one over and had coffee with me, right? So it's like not waiting for someone to say I need help. It's recognizing someone's hurting and how can we love. That's what we're called to do, right? That service space, right? That's just serving. It's like, okay, my service level and giftings might look really different than yours, Michelle, but as long as we're doing what's in our gifting for another person, it definitely won't hurt.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What if somebody's asking for help too? I mean, if they're asking for help, and what I think too, like between depression and then, people that have lost loved ones to suicide and stuff like that. And I feel like they probably analyze that over and over in their minds, like what could they have done? But what are some tools that, to recognize, to be aware of if you see them, to know that this is really urgent?
So maybe what we do is we kind of talk about like the what to look for, what are the signs, what are the things, and some of this might be extreme, so we'll kind of stick on the extreme because you can always tamper it down. I think that's easier than starting down and then growing. So an extreme could be someone verbalizing, I feel trapped, I feel hopeless. Their mood is dramatic. So and dramatic changes. So again, sometimes with teenagers, this is where you need an outsider's eye if you're a parent, because they're going to have dramatic changes. So I say in terms of teenagers, this looks different a little bit and that's why having an outsider's eye with a teenager is sometimes really good. Because as a loved one, when you see that roller coaster of emotion with a teen, an outsider's eye would say, okay, this is normal. And then this is excessive. But when we're talking about adults, a dramatic change in mood would be a really good sign. If someone is typically lighthearted and carefree and easygoing, and they start having rigid rules and expectations on themselves, and maybe even saying like no to things that they would normally have said yes to. And again, it's prolonged. It's going on time after time that you've been engaging with them. That'd be something to pay attention to, right? Something's not well for this person. Really, when someone says, I don't want to be here anymore, what's the point of life? When they actually say, I just want to kill myself, right? Those are things we don't just take for granted. We don't just blow off. It's like, oh, life will get better. Those are not answers you want to say, right? Don't do that. Like, take it seriously. Even behaving recklessly, like not taking their safety as an important factor. That can be driving. That can be dangerous behaviors that they wouldn't normally do. That can be excessive alcohol. That's different. That could be trying drugs that they had never tried before, right? There's all these things that are going, this is not the person that I'm used to being around. So they're kind of behavioral and emotional things, and then verbal, right? So when we hear them saying things, sometimes when people are really experiencing depression, they could also be experiencing anxiety. And so they could start avoiding certain situations, like in regards to like friends, like they normally come to church every Sunday and you haven't seen them in 2 or 3 weeks. Check in on that friend, if normally you would see somebody at a sporting event of the kids and you're like, oh, wow, that mom or that dad hasn't been here in a while. Ask a question. it's not imposing to just say, wow, I've missed Tom. Where, what's been going on? That's not imposing, especially if you've been around them. The other thing to really pay attention is sleep. Sometimes with depression, people sleep excessively, and then sometimes they don't sleep at all. And so those are things to really also look at and go, okay, wow. I think with our children, sometimes they're right. There'll be phone call. I get phone calls. Oh, a teacher called me because they wrote about death, or their writings are dark. And that doesn't mean that there is something wrong. That just might mean that there needs to be another eye looking at this. Or if, like, when you text someone and normally they might put a little smiley emoji and now their emoji is flat. I mean, these are things that, we're seeing, and you're going, hey, don't ignore that, right? As a loved one, as a caregiver, as a friend, as a parent, a spouse. I think the biggest thing we get into when it comes to people and hurt is overlooking it because we don't know. You're not supposed to know what to do. You just have to ask and to be there for them, to listen. One of the things that I've heard said is the thing that people need the most is a listening ear, not a fixed mentality.
Lauren, hang on. So the thing that people need the most is what?
A listening ear, not a fix-it mentality.
A listening ear, not a
fix-it mentality.
Okay.
Did you lose?
You're a little bit blurred, so we can. Oh, there you go. You're back. Thank you.
Oh, great. Sorry.
Thanks, God.
I'm like, I wouldn't know what to do otherwise.
Oh, perfect.
Just pray about it.
Yes, exactly.
So I'll say it again. I said people need a listening ear, not a fix-it mentality.
Ooh, okay. That's really good to know.
So when someone's hurting, you ask a question. Oh, wow, is something going on? Are you dealing with something that you want to talk about? Like, is everything going okay at home? Right? Anything like that, right? You ask an open-ended question to someone that you're concerned about, and then don't say anything else.
We might need that reminder again too. Don't say anything else.
Just listen. And then when you're listening, you want to say things like, wow, it sounds like that's a really difficult situation. My heart's hurting for what you're going through. You can't fix it.
That's so hard too to know, right? Because you love these people and you just want to fix it for them. So it's a good reminder.
Yeah, and then I think you have to be prepared, right? And be really mindful of the judgment, right? I mean, that listening non-judgmentally is, and I'll just give some like examples where I think judgment pops out, right? Okay. I mean, I'm human. I have judgment myself, right? I mean, but judgment pops out when maybe you've heard someone saying, I just don't have any energy to do it. I know exercise would be good for me, but I just can't, I can't seem to get myself out there and do it. Okay. Judgment comes in the slightest little bit in our thoughts of going, well, maybe you're just lazy. Okay. There was my inner voice that just popped out that can happen, right? That sometimes you're just kind of like those negative thinking of another person. That's judgment. And that is going to not lead you to be able to be that active, effective listener. It's going to lead you to cut that conversation off short because you're kind of annoyed by it. That's going to lead you to try to fix it. Like, hey, let's meet tomorrow and go for a run. Well, no, it's probably not going. I mean, you can offer those things later, but in that midst of someone telling you their hurts, you just want to listen without judgment. If you only did, right, that's the fix it.
Yeah.
Well, if you would just try, that's not what the person needs. And it also will shut them down. They'll stop talking to you because they're frustrated, because they're going, yeah, I know the book answers, right? Like I've got that. I'm just hurting and I just want you to listen to me.
Mm.
That's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what do we do next after we listen?
So that's where, if we're talking about someone who is, or that you're worried about their safety,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're talking about, wow, is this person like in a critical situation?
Mm-hmm.
Then you want to then figure out, right? You have to make that discernment, right? Is this a critical situation? You have to ask the hard questions. One of the things that that people think, I've heard these words which tell me people think this. Research has been done about it, so I think that this is an accurate thought. Some people believe that mentioning suicide might cause someone to consider it.
Mm.
It's not true, right? So don't be afraid. Like, so if you say to somebody, this seems to be going on for a really long time, or are there some thoughts of wanting to hurt yourself that are happening that I could be here to support you through? And they might say yes. Right? And so it's like saying, don't be afraid of the outcome. You're not in charge of the outcome, but you can be an available resource just by being a person who they're with. So sometimes in depression, one of the biggest things is like saying, hey, why don't I come hang out with you today? And I'll just do my work at your house today. Like when someone's really hurting, or especially someone who clearly has depression and that that about them and they've already been vulnerable with you, then prior to a downward situation for them, you might talk about the things that are helpful to them. And so you might say like, hey, I know when you're super down, you don't have a clue what's helpful. But today you're doing well. So what kinds of things are helpful today? Well, when they're super down, then you have like kind of like a little resource tool. It really works well in families for us to have this conversation when a person's well. So when they're like able to do the things that are normal for them. And then when they're feeling kind of down and low, you don't ask them if they want it, you just do it. Mm. Right? So, it's really fun. I really, when I'm doing well, I like watching these funny YouTube videos with you. Okay? That's typical teen stuff, right? Okay. When I'm not doing well, I shut my door and I go by myself. Well, I'm going to walk into your room and we're watching a funny YouTube video, and I'm not asking you if you want to do that. Right? So, right. I mean, that's just like an example of how we figure out what works when they're well, and then we do it without asking when they're unwell.
Mm-hmm. Great. I love what you said about asking too the hard questions about, are you considering hurting yourself or something? My husband's best friend, when he was much younger, committed suicide. And he always says, I wish I would have just asked. I wish I would, like that's something he just, why didn't I ask, and then what, if the answer is yes, what's the, if they are considering that, what's the step after that to take?
So you don't leave them alone. And if for some reason you can't stay with them, you find someone who can. You offer to reach out to, if they already have a support team, if you will, right? So people that have struggled with depression throughout their lives typically have some type of support, whether that be a psychiatrist or a therapist or a pastor that they go to, or a clear group of friends that they call, right? So those are questions to ask, like, who's on your support team? I'm here today. Who else is there? If they have those people, especially a psychiatrist or a therapist, you want to offer to call them for them. Hey, could I make that phone call to you? Could we get a session set up? Because therapy, we do crisis sessions. So if I have a client who's been doing okay, but now they're not, even though I don't have a session scheduled until next week, I will fill a time for a crisis session. Mm-hmm. And that will be even maybe just a phone call assessment, because sometimes it means you just need to go to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means a friend needs to call 911. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do. It is. There's also, I mean, it's just really hard to do. if you can, and I'll just be honest, if you can get someone, if they are in that immediate intense crisis and you're worried they're going to hurt themselves if they're alone, if you can get them to go with you to the hospital for an assessment, that is more emotionally well for them than calling 911. And I only say that not because you don't call 911, but if you're capable of doing it, the emotional impact for someone to have to be taken to the hospital in either an ambulance or in a police car has a longer effect on them than if you can take them there voluntarily.
Mm.
So, and I know that might be intense information, but I think it's something we need to know. There's also the National Suicide Hotline. And so you can just pick that up. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's always someone that answers the phone. You never get a voicemail. Mm-hmm. And so the National Hotline is there. And so they will stay on the phone with someone and they will assess them. They will, they will, if need be, call 911. And so that's another option. They're also just crisis counselors. And so if you're not in a critical state, meaning if you're alone, you have a plan to hurt yourself, but you're feeling the thoughts coming of what's the point of life, feeling really hopeless, and you don't have a support team, like you don't have that psychiatrist or that therapist or that pastor to go to immediately, you can call the National Hotline, and there's just crisis counselors that just talk to you for free. And so sometimes a loved one, caregiver, friend just calls that 800 number themselves and says, I have a friend sitting here with me, not really feeling like they want to talk, but can I get some support from you? Mm. And that's another option.
Yeah. All right. We'll post that number on this video so people have it too.
Yeah.
Good. Great resource.
Encouraging help is really something that someone can do, but nagging people to get help isn't helpful. Right? So, I mean, I know this happens in marriages, so I'll kind of bring this up. Like, a spouse is aware that their loved one is just, something's not right. And so you can encourage, hey, here's some numbers for some therapists. Can I help you set up an appointment? It's hard for me to see that you're hurting so much. And I just want you to know I love you and I'm here for you and I want to do anything I can. Okay, so that's empathy, that's showing care, that's showing encouragement, that's offering support. And then you have to pause. And sometimes that has to sink in a little bit. Sometimes they have to think over that and mull over that. Sometimes they need to be able to have some the information in writing. So sometimes that's like you could write them an email or text with those same things so that they can then reread it. Sometimes that's helpful. But nagging for mental health services, it's just not helpful. Sometimes it's saying, I'll go with you. That's not nagging. That's supportive. I have had friends come with their friend to therapy. That's okay.
Yeah.
If they consent to have that person there, it's beautiful, right? They're there. That's the point. And especially, in young relationships, I've had boyfriends bring girlfriends. That's okay. That's supportive. That's not nagging. Ultimatums with adults they're not typically effective.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
So let's just go back to, we talked depression, we talked suicide. What are some other things we should know?
Well, maybe one of the things that would be good is to know, and we talked a little bit about duration. So we talked about I'm having this experience, right? I call it typical distress, or distress needing professional attention. And so maybe it would be good to kind of pay attention to that for a second, because we talked about prolonged means 2 weeks or more of not being able to do something you're used to doing. But some of the other things maybe to pay attention to are when we have typical distress, And distress, I'm using, that can be depression, anxiety, just immense sadness. But distress is basically anything that's making us emotionally uncomfortable. But being able, like a typical distress, a lot of times we can identify a cause. So, like, I had an argument with my husband, or my, friend just moved, or I got fired from my job, or I performed poorly on a test, or finding out that someone betrayed your trust, right? That would be like identifiable cause for an emotional discomfort or distress. Okay, that would be typical. When we're having that more intense, needing more attention distress, we're just crying frequently and not knowing why. We're getting really irritated and on edge and have no cause for it. We're feeling anxious in situations that we normally considered non-threatening, and they don't bother us. We just don't have an identified cause that we can put our finger on. When someone says, well, what's been going on? I don't know. I just am crying all the time, right? That's something to pay attention to as a person, as an individual, knowing this about yourself. But then also, if you're hanging out with someone, you're asking questions, that's something to pay attention to. The intensity typically, right, where the typical distress, the intensity typically matches the circumstance. Crying for a few days after a breakup, that's kind of normal, right? I mean, like, if I was in love and I broke up with the person, crying about it is pretty normal, right? Yeah. Kind of feeling butterflies in my stomach before a presentation. Okay, that's kind of normal. I mean, right? It's distressing. I don't like the feeling, but it matches the circumstance, right? Not talking to a friend for a while because they betrayed you while you work through it, that matches the circumstance, right? So that's typical. Then we go into the other side. It's like it's out of proportion, right? So the emotional response is out of proportion to the circumstances of your life. So feeling worthless or hopeless, associated with, others, anger outbursts that are over small problems, like, for example, like a small problem for a woman, right? Like a kid breaks a dish. That happens. I'm sure we've all had dishes broken in our house because a child dropped something, right? Okay. Being frustrated by that, asking your kid to clean it up, going, darn, I really love that dish, like something like that. But like yelling and screaming and berating a child for making a mistake, right? That anger isn't matching the circumstance. So we want to pay attention to that. And again, this is something that then is happening ongoingly, right? Like it wasn't like a one time, like I had a terrible day and I lost it. It's ongoing, and someone's noticing this in you, or you're noticing it in yourself. Diminished joy towards the things that you once enjoyed. And diminished means it's not like today, you know what, it's kind of cloudy. I don't really feel like exercising, even though that's something I enjoy. That's typical because it's matching the circumstance. It's kind of cloudy, a little dreary. It's been beautiful for a straight week, and I just can't muster up the even desire to put on my running shoes. I would pay attention to that in me, right? Because that wouldn't line up with the circumstance, right? Right. So, and then the last thing to maybe even pay attention to is it gets better, right? So I'm kind of in this distressing space, I've had one of those situations happen, is matching the circumstances, but within a few days, a week, it's getting better when I'm doing things that typically bring me joy. Does that make sense, right? Like I might have had somebody hurt my feelings and I might be sad for a couple days. And then somebody sends me a message and says, hey, you want to grab coffee? Okay, I might still be sad about the friendship issue that I have, but I'm able to go enjoy coffee with someone else.
Right.
Right. that needing attention distress is going, no, not this time. And that
Yeah.
happens again and again, right? So
Right.
they're not able to find that joy in the things that normally bring them joy.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, and then I too, thinking back on this question that was asked too, just what other, because we had a chance to talk about this question in detail too. So what else might be helpful for this woman?
Um, you know, it's prolonged, right? Well, first I would say to her, do you have a therapist? That would be my first thing.
Yeah.
Because in this intensity of distress and it's prolonged,
Mm-hmm.
a friend isn't going to have the resources to meet these needs, right? So
Mm-hmm.
counseling is, it can be threatening, it can be intimidating, it can be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and someone can say, yeah, I've been in therapy. And I hear this, I might be someone's third, fourth, fifth therapist. That's not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
Seasons of life means sometimes we need different approaches.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you've been in counseling before and in therapy before, and you just feel like, well, I've taken all I can from it, I would encourage you, try again, because different therapists have different approaches. That would be the first thing, because that, should I give up, that statement and that question, I just want to encourage this person, no, don't give up. There's hope out there. The next thing I would do is I would make sure I've had all of the potential testing that I can. That would be another, in terms of hormonal balances, that would be another thing. And then if there is an identifying trigger, and that you're stuck on, right? That this person that wrote in, if you're finding yourself stuck in a pattern, like this won't get better, okay? Identify what this is.
Mm-hmm.
What won't get better?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that is for this person, but this is global, and that's lying to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I love drawing. I'm not a very good drawer, but I do a lot of drawing in session. And I like to use the example of a pie. And when we draw a pie, and I don't try to do, it's like 8 pieces, right? Like when we draw a circle and we cut it all apart, it's about 8 pieces, right? And they might not be the same size, but that's okay. It's just a visual. but say, what part of your pie needs support?
Mm-hmm.
All parts of your pie aren't broken.
Mm-hmm.
So parts of your pie could be things like going to church. It could be hanging out with friends. It could be reading books. It could be being a mom. It could be loving to cook. It could be, right? So these are parts of your pie that make up who you are. All of those parts aren't hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
And so we look at the parts that are doing well and we focus there. And when those parts start to grow, then we have the energy and the capacity to look at the parts that are broken. But we really can't address the broken parts until we grow the healthy parts. Because there is a part in you, in all of us, that is not broken.
That is a really good visual, because that's so true. It's the scripture, focus on what's good, true, and worthy of praise. And so many times our eyes get caught on the thing that's not good. It's like it becomes the big shiny object. And the more we think about it, the more bigger it becomes. And like going back to all those great blessings we have in our life, right? Just, yeah, it can be so distracting to take our eyes off of those things versus, yeah, that's a great visual.
Yeah. And I know this person's married because of what they wrote in their question. Don't forget the concept that you have a partner. And even if there's parts of your marriage that are broken, it's the same concept. Not all parts are broken. Engage the parts that are working. Engage that partner space. Get support in that if you need it also. Right? sometimes we don't have to do this alone. And we definitely, when we're married, we don't have to do this alone. We all get married for a reason. I think one of the biggest reasons is because we want a partner in life. So utilize your partner.
That's such great advice. I know we're kind of short on time, but just because we won't see you until after the holidays that we have, what are going into the holidays? Because that's going to look different for a lot of people right now with not being maybe able to be with the family that they're used to and all of those things. So what are some other things going into the holidays where women can help stay healthy mentally amongst COVID?
Amongst COVID, that's right. I read something and I loved what it said. It said, make a list and cut it twice. I really thought that was good. Because you're right. It makes sense, right? One of the things with COVID that I'm accepting, it doesn't mean I like it, just FYI. I really don't like it, but I'm choosing to accept it because it's the facts. Like I can't change it. Is that some of the traditions that I normally would do aren't going to happen. And so that means that I have to be able to flex my traditions and say, so when I read that, when it said make a list and cut it twice, I was thinking in my head, what are my traditions? Like, what are the things that I just so look forward to? And I might have to be okay with some of those not happening and being joyful about the ones that are. And so I really like that. It just gave me a good little thought there. Breathing. You're right. We come into the holidays and we start stressing. I don't know why we do this to ourselves, but we do. And so like taking some deep breaths, being in the present, what is joyful, what is grateful that you can be grateful for today, not focusing so much outwardly on the tomorrow, the next day, the next day, but today, just focusing in today. Focus on people and not on things, right? Don't get caught up in the hustle and bustle. You can't go shopping anyway. So like, I mean, okay, you really can with a mask and with social distancing. Amazon. But you also can make a choice this year to do something different. How could you focus on people and not things? Right? I
think this might be the most beautiful holiday season ever. People are to do that because that is the true,
That's the meaning, right? That's what we're trying to. Yeah, I mean, so that was one. But keep it simple. That's the other thing. It's like it doesn't have to be extravagant. Like we put stress on ourselves because of the expectations we put on ourselves. What about simplifying what you desire to do and then enjoying it that way? Recognizing triggers. It's like spot your triggers, right? So like if too many people cause you stress, well, why don't you try not doing activities that are engaging in that? If going out in groups at the mall causes you stress, recognize what your triggers are and make active choices to do something different. I loved the idea of losing yourself in service because sometimes when we're hurting or when we're kind of getting down about things not being the same, then it really becomes about self and we get a little self-consumed. There's nothing better to distract us from ourself than for doing for others. And so I love that concept of, right, contributing helps us find meaning and gain purpose and perspective. Contribute outward, right? So, but then the next one is don't lose self-care, right? So I think sometimes we kind of mix those up and we get all confused with like, oh, if I'm taking care of me, then I'm being selfish. No, self-care is not selfish. Taking care of you is giving you enough so that you can then go and do for others. But I think this season I'm going, how can I just lose myself in service and not think about what I'm not getting, or what's not going the same.
I love that. And so many people are going to need, stuff this season too. There's lots of ways that the people can help.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I when you asked me that question, I started going, oh, that's a fun blog. So there'll be a blog about this on my website because there's so many things that that if you give yourself permission to think about options, there's so many things that can help. and I use the word thrive in the holiday, not survive the holiday, but thrive in the holiday. Even though it looks different.
You have to post the link below when you post,
okay,
so that the women can.
Right.
That would be.
I will.
I love it. We will miss you over the holidays, but we'll be
having
you back next year. So ladies, whatever questions you have, go ahead and post them or email them to women@burkecommunity.com. You can send us your anonymous questions and we will ask Lauran, and we so appreciate you being here and joining us again today.
It was super fun. So happy fall, happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, like all of those things. And I'll see you in the new year.
Sounds great. Bye, ladies.
Bye.